A German shepherd stumbled out of the alley, the rope still biting into the scarred skin around his neck. His body trembled, thin and bruised, yet something in his eyes refused to break. He should have been nothing more than another stray left behind, sold for $3 as if life could be measured in loose change. But inside that dim shop, hidden behind rows of rusting cages, 3 small hearts still beat, waiting for mercy to find them. No one in Silver Creek expected the Marine to walk through that door that night. No one believed that one broken soldier and a battered dog could change everything. But they remembered what compassion felt like, and they remembered how to fight for the ones the world had forgotten. What followed would test the edges of cruelty and remind everyone that hope, even in silence, never really dies. Before we begin, drop your country in the comments below, let me know where you're watching from. And if you believe that no life, human or animal, deserves to be treated as worthless, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just restore your faith in miracles. The heat in Silver Creek clung like an old promise as the sun slid low, spilling its last light across sagging rooftops and gutters streaked with rust. The sky burned orange, then cooled into the copper reflection of the slow-moving river. The little town lay cradled between cottonwoods and brick, a place of working hands and quiet hearts that didn't brag. In late summer, the air always smelled faintly of damp rope and machine oil drifting from the old sawmill by the riverbank. Down on Willow Street, where the pavement cracked like dry lips and the lone streetlight blinked in lazy rhythm, an abandoned veterinary supply store slouched beneath years of dust. It wasn't much to look at: faded posters for flea collars, a sun-bleached sign missing a letter from its name, Dr. Glass. Time had fogged the windows until they looked smoked over. Yet the shop had seen its share of grief. Too many owners had once stood outside its door holding empty leashes, waiting for miracles that never came. Ethan Cole walked that street with the sure, economical stride of a man who still measured distance in clicks. 36, lean and straight-backed, he carried himself like someone who had spent too long being inspected and had never forgotten how to pass muster. His dark brown hair was cropped close, a thread of silver already teasing his temples, as though time had touched him just to see if he'd notice. He hadn't bothered to care. His face was cut from honest lines, clean-shaven, angular, with skin browned by long days under open skies. His nose had once been broken and set back in place without fuss. But what people remembered were his eyes, river green, steady, patient. They carried the kind of calm that made others straighten unconsciously, as if meeting a man who'd already survived the storm. Ethan had the stillness Marines bring home when the noise is finally over, the quiet of someone who knows what panic costs and what silence is worth. On his hand was a pale band where a ring had once rested, and across his knuckle, a thin white scar, small histories he didn't talk about anymore. Walking beside him was Shadow, a sable German shepherd, older now but carrying himself like an aging king. His muzzle had grayed to silver, and his step, though careful, still held the strength of training. One ear bore a notch from a fight long ago, proof that something had once tried to claim a piece of him, and he'd refused to give it. His amber eyes were deep and knowing, the kind that catalogued every sound and scent, reading truth and deceit as easily as breathing. Shadow's loyalty ran deep, not simple, not blind. He gave his trust to the mission first, and to the man who honored it second. The people of Silver Creek had learned to believe whatever this dog distrusted. Children admired him but knew the rules around him, because Ethan had taught them that gentleness had boundaries worth respecting. They walked past the shuttered shop simply because the light had turned gold there. Ethan had spent the day sanding a widow's porch out on Alder Lane, a woman who still set out 2 teacups at dusk and drank only from one. The scent of cedar clung to his sleeves, as though the wood hoped he'd carry it home to the forest it once belonged to. He was thinking about his list: fix the pantry hinge, call the power company about the flickering transformer, stop by McCree's for Shadow's food, the good kind, not the bargain brand the clerk kept smiling about. Then Shadow froze. It wasn't a sound Ethan could name, more a change in the dog's weight, a subtle coiling of muscle. The easy rhythm vanished. Shadow's chest rumbled, a low growl rising from deep inside. It wasn't the sound of threat, it was warning. Something nearby had tilted the world off balance. Ethan stopped instantly. You don't argue with tides, or with dogs that have saved your life before. What is it, old boy? He asked softly. But already his pulse had shifted, that quiet, trained drumbeat that knew how to quicken without spilling into panic. Shadow's gaze flicked to the shop window. It was the look of a partner who's found a tripwire and needs your hand steady. Ethan stepped closer. The glass was so clouded that his reflection looked like a stranger. He brushed his sleeve across it, and the shop revealed a sliver of itself, empty counters, peeling laminate, a leash rack that hung like a row of dead snakes, a cracked cash register buried in dust. But what was wrong lived deeper, in the shadows near the back wall, beneath a dead ceiling fan. A cage. Too small to comfort, too large to justify. The bars were orange with rust where teeth had tested them. Inside, 3 tiny bodies quivered like leaves that had forgotten how to fall. Burlap feed sacks covered their heads, ragged, filthy, tied tight with twine around thin necks. The ropes weren't for walking. Blood had dried dark at the knots. Tiny paws were scraped raw where they'd clawed at the floor. The breath coming from beneath those sacks was shallow, too tired to cry out. They were German shepherd pups, you could see it in the angle of their ears, the promise in their paws. The smallest was all ribs and courage, trembling like a song waiting to be sung. The next one, eyes glowing dimly through the burlap, held his head an inch higher, as if remembering a better story. The third lay heavier, round-bellied, older by a week perhaps, his breathing uneven, flinching whenever a moth brushed the light. Above their cage, a piece of cardboard hung crookedly from a nail. The letters, scrawled by a half-dead marker, tilted downhill. 3 for $3. Must go today. For a long second, Silver Creek went silent, or maybe Ethan did. There's a kind of anger that doesn't shout. It counts. The sign didn't say puppies. It said product. It didn't say free to a good home. It said clearance. And in that ugly arithmetic, something inside Ethan clicked into place. Ethan stood motionless before the glass, his reflection ghosted over the darkness within. His hand hovered an inch from the window, muscles tight beneath his sleeve. He could smell it even from here, the sour reek of neglect hiding behind lemon-scented cleaner, like a lie trying to dress itself in something decent. He counted the details the way he always did, methodically, like inventory before a mission. The door was chained, but not well. The padlock looked older than the paint on the frame. He noted the narrow alley curling behind the shop, a fence there bowed just enough for a man and his dog to pass. The thing inside wasn't moving like a person. This wasn't bait or display. It was abandonment, pure and sold cheap. Shadow pressed closer, the faint rumble in his chest vibrating against Ethan's leg. Easy, Ethan murmured, laying a calming hand on the dog's shoulder. But the word was for himself too, a command to hold steady against the tide rising behind his ribs. Memories flickered. A warehouse half a world away, a friend's laughter cut short, the long nights that followed. He'd carried the weight of other lives once, not heavy by size, but heavy by the fact that they ended too soon. Those ghosts never left. They just waited for a door like this to open again. He looked back through the glass. One of the pups had pressed her face into the other's shoulder, trying to breathe air through someone else's courage. Another lifted a paw, trembling but deliberate, and rested it against the bars. The smallest gesture, yet it cracked something open in Ethan's chest. He read the cardboard sign one last time, 3 for $3. Must go today. Then he made his decision. Shadow, he said softly. The dog's ears flicked. Let's move. The chain on the door gave after one solid shove, clattering like a throat clearing itself before confession. Paint chips flaked down in a dusty rain as Ethan stepped inside. The smell hit immediately, lemon cleaner, mildew, fur gone bad, the iron tang of dried blood. The man behind the counter looked up sluggishly. Harold Lem. The name slid through Ethan's mind like a whisper he'd heard before. Mid-50s, wiry to the point of frail, shoulders sharp beneath a filthy shirt that might once have been white. His hair was thin, combed over and failing at its job. His jaw hung slack around a toothpick. When he spoke, his voice rasped, coated with smoke and disinterest. "Afternoon," he muttered. "Need something?" Ethan didn't bother answering. His eyes had already found the cage. Shadow moved first, slipping ahead until his nose pressed through the rusted bars. The pups flinched, their bodies twitching like faulty wires, but the sound of another dog, alive, steady, gentle, seemed to anchor them. Shadow licked at the burlap, soft as breath. The smallest whimpered in answer. Ethan crouched low. His hands, though calloused and scarred, were steady as he worked the knots loose. The ropes were stiff with dried blood. When they came free, his palms shone red in the dusty light. The sacks slid away, revealing faces that should have still been round with puppyhood, now hollowed by fear and neglect. Their eyes blinked against the sudden air like they were learning what freedom smelled like. "You can't just take them," Harold said, voice rising. He straightened, toothpick bobbing in his mouth. "Ain't charity here." Shadow turned his head then, lips lifting just enough to show the edge of white teeth. The air in the room shifted. The growl wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was a statement, one that made Harold's next breath catch. Ethan rose, the three pups gathered carefully in his arms, too light, too fragile. Their ribs pressed against his forearm, heartbeat against heartbeat. He walked to the counter, every step deliberate. He pulled 3 crumpled bills from his pocket and dropped them on the wood. The sound cracked the silence. "They're mine now." Harold blinked. "Wasn't doing you no wrong," he muttered, half shrug, half sneer. "Just making room. Nobody wants mutts that don't stand straight. Cheaper to sell M than bury M." His words fell flat, but his eyes darted when Shadow took a step closer, hackles raised, body swelling with quiet threat. Ethan's voice stayed calm, that same calm that used to fill radios before orders were given. "If I see this again, anywhere in Silver Creek, you won't have a shop left to hide in." Harold's jaw worked. The toothpick splintered between his teeth. He didn't answer. Ethan turned away, the pups trembling against his chest, Shadow flanking him on instinct. Outside, the sun had dipped low, the light turned bronze, soft but solemn. The air smelled faintly of river dust and evening bread from the bakery down the street. The pups whimpered, 3 tiny threads of sound. Shadow brushed his shoulder against Ethan's leg, as if to remind him that the circle was whole again, at least for now. They crossed the street, the shop's broken sign flickering behind them like a heartbeat slowing to stillness. Ethan opened the truck door carefully, settling the pups on a blanket across the seat. One hand stayed on them the whole drive, feeling every faint rise and fall of breath as the town slid by in shadows and neon. The diner lights dimmed. The hardware store locked up. A freight train moaned somewhere along the river. Silver Creek didn't ask questions. But tonight, the town seemed to watch. Ethan turned down the gravel road leading to the small brick building beside the laundromat, Jensen Veterinary and Rescue. A hand-painted sign swayed on its chain, letters faded but proud. Inside, a wind chime tinkled above the door, its cheer too bright for the cargo he carried. Shadow jumped down first, stiff but alert. Ethan followed, pushing the door open with his shoulder. The scent inside was antiseptic and coffee, the smell of healing and habit. Behind the counter stood Dr. Clara Jensen, tall, mid-40s, moving with the slight limp of someone who'd once lifted something too heavy and refused to let go. Her sandy hair was pulled into a loose braid, her scrubs wrinkled from hours of work. The fine lines at her eyes spoke more of laughter once given than of years past. She looked up, saw the bundle in Ethan's arms, and gasped. "Lord, Ethan," she said, coming around the counter, her gait uneven. "What did you drag in this time?" Not dragging, he murmured. Rescuing. He laid the pups gently on the steel table under the sterile light. The burlap sacks dropped away completely, and the truth of their condition filled the room. Torn skin. Rope burns. Coats matted to dull gray. Clara's jaw tightened. She slipped on latex gloves, her hands moving with the precision of someone who'd seen too much and still refused to look away. She touched the smallest first, tracing along its ribs, whispering softly, "You're just a little slip of moonlight, aren't you?" "Luna," Ethan repeated under his breath. The next pup met Clara's gaze straight on, exhausted but unbroken, eyes burning like small coals. "And you," Ethan said, brushing a thumb over its ear, "Blaze." The third pup, heavier but weak, groaned faintly. Clara probed along his flank and frowned. Multiple injection sites. Whoever did this tried to bulk him up fast. Probably used growth hormones. Ethan stroked the pup's head gently. "Tighten," he whispered. "He'll hold." Shadow stood guard near the door, his amber eyes fixed on the table. Every whimper drew a twitch of his ears, a low growl of warning aimed at ghosts only he could scent. When Clara finished her examination, she stripped off her gloves. "Ethan, these aren't strays," she said grimly. "They're from a ring. I've seen marks like these before, black market breeders using steroids and hormone cocktails. Makes the dogs look strong for buyers, but it kills them young. I've treated 3 other cases this month." Ethan's jaw set like stone. So Harold Lem wasn't just making space. Clara nodded, her expression hard. He was clearing inventory. The clinic fell silent but for the sound of shallow breaths. The pups had huddled together again, trembling but alive. Ethan brushed his thumb across Luna's ear, she leaned into the touch, just barely. Clara filled syringes with fluids, setting them out in a row. "This'll hurt before it helps," she warned. "But it'll keep them breathing." She slid the first needle beneath Titan's skin. Blaze yelped when his turn came, but Ethan steadied him with a soft word, one of those quiet ones learned from long nights overseas. Luna didn't react at all, only sighed when Shadow nosed her paw. Clara finished, peeling off her gloves. "Ethan, whoever's behind this isn't small time. These dogs are disposable to them. You need to be careful." He met her gaze, that steady marine calm back in his eyes. "I know. But it's not ending here." Clara watched him for a long moment, then wrote down instructions on a notepad, her handwriting brisk, almost military. "Light feedings. Frequent. Watch for tremors. Bring them back in the morning." Ethan nodded. He bundled the pups in a soft flannel blanket, their bodies curling close together like words trying to spell hope. Shadow waited at the door, his frame filling the threshold like a sentinel carved from loyalty itself. As they stepped into the night, the lamplight painted gold lines across the gravel. Ethan inhaled the damp air drifting from the river, then exhaled hard, steady, ready. He whispered to Shadow, "We're not walking by this time either." And the dog's eyes, ancient and burning, answered without a sound. The clinic had grown quiet. Only the hum of the overhead light remained, and the faint, uneven breaths of the 3 small lives wrapped in flannel on the steel table. Clara had stepped into the back room to prepare antibiotics and nutritional paste, her footsteps soft but uneven, that old back injury reminding her of winters past. Ethan stayed where he was, leaning against the counter, his shoulders heavy but not yet tired. The smell of disinfectant clung to his sleeves, sharp and sterile, masking the scent of the pup's fear. Shadow sat in the corner, not resting, not really. His body was coiled, ears forward, head turning with the precision of a soldier guarding the perimeter. He wasn't a young dog anymore, but his instincts had aged into something almost supernatural. Every sound, every breath in that room was measured. And when something fell outside the rhythm, he knew. The growl came first, low, deep, almost below hearing. Then a bark, sharp, commanding. Ethan's head snapped toward him. "What is it?" he murmured. Shadow was fixed on the far corner of the room, where an old iron box sat half hidden beneath a shelf crowded with forgotten leashes. The metal was streaked with rust, dented as though someone had tried to stomp it flat. Ethan had noticed it earlier but dismissed it as clutter, some relic of a client long gone. But now the dog's stance said otherwise. Ethan crossed the floor, his boots echoing softly against the tile. He crouched beside the box. The lock was broken, replaced with a bent clasp. He pried it open. The lid groaned like something reluctant to speak. A sharp, metallic odor hit him, cold, chemical, too clean to belong here. Inside was a cloudy plastic bag, tied tight with a knot. 2 syringes lay within, capped but stained faintly along their glass barrels. A scrap of torn paper was folded beside them, ink smeared and blocky. 3 letters, written in thick black marker. RX-92. Ethan's stomach tightened. He didn't need a veterinary degree to know that wasn't good. Those letters, that format, looked like the labeling used on military supply manifests. Efficient. Cold. Without compassion. He was still staring when Clara returned, carrying a tray of vials and gauze. She froze mid-step, the color draining from her face. The tray rattled as she set it down too fast. "That shouldn't be here," she said, voice gone sharp. She crossed the room in 3 limping strides, tugging off her gloves and picking up 1 syringe with trembling fingers. Under the fluorescent light, a faint discoloration shimmered inside the fluid, not clear, but tinted with a sickly gold hue. "This was pulled off the market 5 years ago," she said tightly. RX-92, anabolic stimulant. Breeders used it to bulk up litters, make them grow faster, glossier, stronger. It killed more than it helped. I watched a whole litter seize to death in under a day. It's been banned nationwide. Ethan turned the scrap of paper over. The handwriting was clumsy, rushed, not a vet's hand. Someone keeping track of quantities, not names. "Someone left this here," he said. "Intentionally." Clara's brow furrowed, her hands trembling just once before she steadied them. "This clinic's always been a drop point for strays. Sometimes people leave boxes at the door, old collars, maybe a note. But this," she gestured to the syringes. "This isn't an accident. Someone's using this place to hide what shouldn't exist." Ethan could see it in her eyes, the rare moment when a woman who'd spent decades saving lives realized the fight had shifted. There was anger there, yes, but beneath it, grief, the kind that never stopped echoing. "Clara," Ethan said softly, "who could get their hands on this?" Her gaze hardened. "Not small-time breeders." RX-92 was manufactured under agricultural licensing. The supply chain was supposed to have been destroyed after the ban. If it's resurfacing, someone with resources is moving it, someone upstream. Ethan tied the plastic bag shut again and slipped it carefully into his jacket pocket. His mind was already working in clean, efficient lines: evidence, source, chain of custody, probable distribution. The habits of a Marine never really retired, they just changed uniforms. Shadow stood beside him, ears pricked, eyes glowing amber in the sterile light. The old dog didn't need to speak. Ethan understood the look. They'd been handed a mission again, one written not on paper, but in the lives of those who couldn't defend themselves. When Clara came back to the table, she checked the pups again, gentle, steady hands working with clinical precision. Luna's tiny chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Blaze twitched his paw like he was chasing something in a dream. Titan's breathing had deepened, no longer the desperate pant of a body on the edge. Clara exhaled. "They'll make it through the night," she said. "Barely. I'll call you with results in the morning." Ethan nodded once, his hand finding the rough fur along Shadow's neck. "We'll be ready." He carried the pups carefully to the truck, wrapped in their blanket. The night outside had settled thick and cool, the air damp with river fog. The headlights cut twin paths through the cottonwoods as he drove home, the sound of gravel hissing beneath the tires. Out at the edge of Silver Creek, his cabin waited, small, weathered, but solid. Built by his father decades ago from pine boards that still carried the scent of rain. 2 bedrooms. A slanted porch. A roof that sang when storms came. Tonight, it felt less like a house and more like a fortress. Inside, Ethan spread a thick wool blanket on the living room floor and laid a sheepskin over it. The pups collapsed together, their bodies pressing into one trembling knot. Luna buried her muzzle beneath Blaze's chest, Titan stretched protectively across them, a shield of soft, heavy warmth. Their breaths rose and fell in a fragile, uneven chorus. Ethan stood at the doorway for a while, arms crossed, eyes soft with something close to prayer. Shadow padded past him and settled on the porch, curling into his usual post, not sleeping, just watching. Fireflies blinked across the yard, and the river whispered somewhere in the distance. Every time the wind stirred the pines, Shadow lifted his head, scanning the dark like a sentry guarding a battlefield that no one else could see. And Ethan thought, not for the first time, that some wars don't end when the uniform comes off, they just find new ground to fight on. Morning came to Silver Creek softly, the kind that doesn't wake you but finds its way in, pale mist rolling off the river, clinging to the porch rails like it didn't want to leave. The sun was shy behind the trees, casting the yard in a faint gray hush. Ethan was already up. He had been long before dawn, the habits of old deployments still etched into his bones. He brewed his coffee the way he always did, black, no sugar, a soldier's ritual against the quiet. The cabin smelled of pine and steam. Shadow ate first, his meal measured out with the same precision Ethan gave himself in the field. Outside, dew clung to the grass, each drop catching the newborn light like glass beads. The pups stirred restlessly beneath the wool blanket, their tiny shapes moving as one. They were still alive, fragile, uncertain, but alive. Ethan crouched beside them. "Morning, little ones," he said softly. "Let's see what we've got today." He carried them outside, one by one, to the yard that stretched behind the cabin. The fence was old, the boards leaning in places, but it held, more symbolic than strong, a reminder that boundaries didn't have to be perfect to be true. The ground was a mix of dust and grass, patches of dirt soft enough to keep a paw print, hard enough to hold a memory. Shadow trotted ahead, making a slow perimeter sweep, tail low but steady. He wasn't guarding for enemies, he was teaching. Each step said, "The world is still here. You can walk through it and not be hurt." Ethan set the 3 pups down in the grass. For a moment, they simply stood there, frozen, unsure of what freedom meant. Then Titan sneezed, Blaze took a cautious step forward, and Luna blinked toward the sunlight like someone seeing it for the first time. Ethan crouched low and gave a sharp whistle, not loud, just clean and precise. A signal. The same kind he used to use when sound meant survival. Blaze's response was immediate. His head snapped up, ears high, spine rigid. He dropped into a sit so fast it looked rehearsed. His amber eyes locked on Ethan's hand, waiting for the next command. Ethan's chest tightened. That wasn't curiosity. That was conditioning. The kind drilled into working dogs, or worse, into animals used for illegal training. Titan was next. He wandered a few steps, nose down, exploring the ground. Ethan flicked a flashlight beam across the dirt, just to test. The moment the light swept near, Titan jerked back violently, legs braced, teeth bared in a growl that came from reflex, not choice. The beam had meant something to him once. Probably pain. Probably punishment. Then there was Luna. She was smaller, quieter, her ribs still sharp beneath her thin coat. When Ethan reached for a garden spade leaning against the fence, the soft clink of metal against wood made her collapse instantly, body flat, paws over her muzzle, trembling so hard he could feel it from where he knelt. That wasn't fear. It was memory. He lowered the spade carefully and crouched beside her. Easy now, he whispered, his hand hovering over her back but not touching yet. No one's going to hurt you here. It took her several breaths before she believed him. Ethan sat back, his heart a weight behind his ribs. These pups weren't just abandoned. They had been trained, each in a different direction. Blaze, the obedient one. Titan, the fighter. Luna, the submissive. He'd seen it before, overseas, animals turned into tools for things too dark to name. Now it was happening here, in his own quiet town. Shadow returned from his patrol and went straight to Luna, lowering his massive head beside her. He nudged her gently until she peeked out from under her paws. Then he lay down, curling around her like a wall. Only then did her trembling stop. Ethan watched the old shepherd's eyes, soft, patient, ancient. In that moment, he realized that Shadow wasn't just watching the pups. He was teaching them what safety looked like. The sun broke through the mist, laying gold streaks across the fence line. But for Ethan, the warmth didn't reach far enough. He felt only the cold edge of realization, the kind that comes right before a mission starts. He went inside, grabbed his phone, and scrolled through contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. Marissa Hail. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was rough, the kind that came from too many late nights and not enough rest. Cole, she said. Been a while. Not long enough, Ethan replied dryly. Then his tone shifted, calm but sharp. I found 3 German Shepherd pups. Scarred. Conditioned. And a bag labeled RX-92. There was silence on the other end, heavy, knowing silence. When Marissa spoke again, her voice carried command. RX-92 was wiped out of circulation. If it's back, someone's manufacturing it off record. Where did you find it? In a closed shop, Ethan said. Ropes on their necks. Sign said 3 for $3. He could almost hear Marissa's jaw clench. Then the sound of her typing filled the line. Harold Lem, she muttered. He's on my list. Low-level handler, small shop owner, connections to cross-state kennels. But if RX-92's in his possession, he's part of something bigger. Ethan stared out the window at the yard. The pups were huddled together again. Shadow stood sentinel beside them, his silhouette cut against the pale morning light. Tell me, Ethan said, voice low. What kind of operation uses dogs like these? The kind that doesn't see them as dogs, Marissa replied flatly. They're bred, injected, and trained for illegal fighting rings and black market auctions. Shepherds fetch the highest bids when they're half-grown and conditioned. The ones that fail get discarded, or worse. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. Not in my town. Marissa exhaled slowly. I'll send you what we've got. But Cole, be careful. These people don't just move dogs. They move money, weapons, sometimes even people. You remember El Paso? I remember, he said. His voice was quiet, but the weight behind it was heavy. Outside, Blaze sat upright in the grass, his ears perked as if he understood. Titan's chest rose and fell in slow, deep breaths, still restless even in peace. Luna had tucked herself beneath Shadow's front legs, finally sleeping. Ethan looked at them, and then at the horizon, where the river shimmered like molten glass. I'm not looking away, he said. Shadow, as if hearing, rose and walked back to him, pressing his head against Ethan's thigh. The man's fingers sank into the coarse fur, a silent agreement, a promise. They had walked through fire before. They would do it again. Together. Night dropped over Silver Creek like a curtain of smoke. The moon hid behind thick clouds, leaving only the faint gleam of wet gravel and the orange blink of far-off factory lights. Ethan's truck rolled slowly along the deserted industrial road, tires whispering over dust. He wasn't dressed like himself tonight. The pressed lines and quiet discipline were gone, traded for an oil-stained jacket, torn jeans, and a ball cap pulled low over his brow. He looked like the kind of man who bought things cheap and asked no questions. Beside him sat Shadow, his coat brushed with dirt to dull the sheen, his tail still, eyes alert beneath the cap's shadow. Ethan hated disguising him like this, turning a proud guardian into bait, but necessity had no room for pride. Ahead, an old warehouse loomed, a sagging rectangle of corrugated metal patched with rust. Two floodlights hung from leaning poles, buzzing faintly, painting long slashes of yellow across the lot. Around them, trucks and vans idled with their headlights dimmed, license plates caked in grime. Ethan parked in the dark between two dead trailers and climbed out, tugging a frayed rope leash around Shadow's neck. "Stay close," he murmured. The dog moved in silence, muscles coiled but obedient. A broad man with a shaved head and a clipboard blocked the entrance. His jacket strained against his chest, and his small eyes squinted through the light. "Name?" he grunted. Ethan kept his gaze low. "Does it matter?" he said, voice roughened. "Heard there's dogs. I've got cash." He pulled a folded wad of bills from his pocket and let the man see just enough green. The guard snorted. "Go on, then." He jerked his thumb toward the door. Inside, the air was thick with ammonia, sawdust, and fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, stacked too high. Tarps hung like curtains, muffling sound, but what filtered through wasn't barking, it was the thin whimper of animals too afraid to make noise. Ethan walked slowly, shadow tight against his leg. In the half-light, he counted at least 30 cages. Shepherds, Malinois, pit mixes. All silent. Eyes wide. The silence was worse than noise, it was obedience learned through pain. Two men whispered near a stack of pallets. "New batch came in," one muttered, thin and twitchy. "Already trained," said the other. "Goes quick tonight." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Already trained." The words landed like stones. At the far end of the warehouse, a makeshift stage had been built from wooden pallets. A microphone screeched as feedback filled the air. Then a figure stepped forward. Tall, wiry, dressed in a long leather trench coat despite the heat. His slicked-back black hair glinted beneath the lights, and a narrow scar cut through one eyebrow. Colt Rayner. Ethan recognized him instantly from old FBI files Marissa had once shown him. Early 40s, restless energy, a predator's grin. A man who had slipped through half a dozen raids and built an empire on cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colt drawled, voice smooth as oil. "Welcome back. As promised, prime stock tonight. Trained, tested, ready for whatever work you have waiting. No refunds. No complaints." A handler dragged the first dog onto the stage, a shepherd pup barely older than Luna. Its coat was patchy where injections had burned through the fur. The handler barked a command in Spanish. "Siente." The pup dropped instantly into a sit, shaking but silent. Ethan's pulse kicked hard. The same command Blaze had obeyed in the yard. This wasn't coincidence, this was a chain of training that reached straight back to Silver Creek. Another pup followed, smaller, eyes huge with terror. When the handler cracked a chain on the floor, it collapsed flat, trembling. Ethan felt the air leave his chest. It could have been Luna standing there. He forced himself to move, to keep playing his part. Hands in pockets. Head down. Buyer, not savior. Then something changed. Colt's gaze swept the crowd, landed briefly on Ethan, and lingered. Maybe it was the way he stood too straight, or the quiet control that didn't fit the rest of the room. Colt's smile faltered. He whispered something to a man at his side, then turned and slipped toward a side door. Ethan's instincts flared. He bent low, murmuring, "Now, Shadow." The rope leash snapped as the shepherd surged forward, a blur of muscle and fury. The room erupted. Buyers stumbled back, chairs toppled. Colt spun just as Shadow hit him full force, driving him to the concrete. His coat flared out like broken wings as he fell. Shadow stood over him, teeth bared inches from his throat, a low, vibrating growl filling the space. Colt froze, hands lifted. Then the warehouse lights exploded into brilliance. Floodlights from the side doors flared white. Boots thundered. Shouts cut through the chaos. Federal agents. Nobody move. Marissa Hail stormed through the entrance, FBI vest strapped tight over dark clothing, pistol raised. Her hair was tied in a severe bun, her expression carved from iron. Behind her, a dozen agents fanned out, moving fast, arresting handlers, disarming guards, kicking open cage locks. The silence shattered into chaos, men shouting, dogs barking, metal clanging. Marissa's voice cut through it all. Down on the ground. Hands where I can see them. Colt tried to speak, but Shadow pressed harder, forcing him still. Two agents rushed forward, snapping cuffs around his wrists. Colt spat, voice a snarl. You think this ends with me? You don't even know who. Shadow's growl deepened, drowning him out. The cages began to rattle, not from guards, but from the dogs themselves. One barked, then another. Then all at once, a chorus rose, a storm of sound that filled every corner of the warehouse. It wasn't fear anymore. It was release. Marissa lowered her weapon, breathing hard. Her eyes found Ethan through the noise. She allowed the faintest smile. You always had a flair for timing, she muttered. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes had gone to a trembling pup on the stage, the one that looked so much like Luna. He moved toward it, lifting the little body gently from the rough floor. The pup buried its face against his jacket, and the noise around them faded for a heartbeat. For now, at least, some lives had been pulled back from the edge. The sun hadn't yet risen when the last of the trucks rolled away from the warehouse. Flashing red and blue lights still painted the corrugated walls, reflecting off puddles that had formed in the cracked asphalt. The air was thick with exhaust, wet sawdust, and the faint, bitter smell of adrenaline spent. Inside, the chaos had settled into silence. Cages stood open now, the animals gone, transferred to shelters, rescues, or veterinary vans under federal escort. What remained was the echo of what had been done there. At the far end of the building, Colt Rayner sat slouched in a folding chair inside a temporary holding room. His wrists were cuffed to a steel table, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Even in defeat, his smirk lingered, a predator's grin, dulled but not gone. Across from him sat Ethan Cole, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He wasn't wearing a badge. He didn't need one. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes burning amber through the dim light. Marissa Hail stood behind the table, sleeves rolled up, vest unzipped, the fatigue in her shoulders visible but her focus razor sharp. She'd spent the last hour taking statements, making calls, keeping her team coordinated. Now she wanted answers. You've got quite the setup, she said evenly, flipping open a folder. Multiple state violations. Animal cruelty. Illegal transport. Distribution of controlled substances. RX-92, ring any bells? Colt chuckled dryly, his voice hoarse from shouting earlier. You think I'm the top of the chain? Lady, I'm a vendor. A middleman. You cut me down, another 10 grow in my place. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but cold. Then tell us where the roots are. Colt's gaze flicked toward Shadow and faltered. The dog's stare didn't waver, steady, relentless, the kind of gaze that made men confess things they didn't mean to. Silver Creek small, Colt muttered. Too small for what we were moving. Kennels stretched across 3 states. Breeding, testing, training. You've hit one. There are others. Marissa slammed the folder shut. Where? He hesitated, the smirk returning, but it wavered at the sight of Ethan's stillness. Silence filled the room, thick, heavy, dangerous. Finally, Colt spoke. Old farm, edge of town. No one uses it anymore. Couple of sheds, a barn. Looks abandoned. You'll find what's left there, if they haven't cleared it out already. Shadow growled, low and deep. Ethan rose, his chair scraping the floor. He said nothing as he turned toward the door. Marissa followed, signaling 2 agents to keep Colt contained. Outside, dawn was breaking. The horizon glowed faintly pink above the cottonwoods. The air smelled of river mist and diesel fuel. Marissa rubbed a hand over her face, exhaustion setting in behind her eyes. "You really think he's telling the truth?" she asked. Ethan's answer came after a pause. "Men like that don't lie about locations. They lie about remorse." An hour later, a black government SUV turned off the main road and wound through pine forest. The dirt track narrowed, then opened into a clearing where an old farmhouse and barn slumped beneath years of decay. Rusted fencing sagged under weeds, but the wire had been patched too carefully to belong to neglect. Marissa parked behind a row of junipers. She checked her sidearm and adjusted her jacket. "This place stinks of cover-up," she said, scanning the property. Ethan nodded, his eyes tracing the ground, the horizon, the lines of the building, inventorying everything the way soldiers do before stepping into uncertainty. He opened the back door. Shadow leapt out silently, landing in a crouch. The old dog's nose went to work immediately, tail rigid, body angled forward. The closer they got, the worse the smell became. Not death, not exactly, something older. Rot beneath bleach. Decay hidden under the pretense of cleaning. The barn door creaked open under Ethan's hand. The hinges whined like something waking from a bad dream. Inside, dust swirled in the flashlight beams, catching on strands of cobwebs. Rows of kennels lined the walls, bars rusted orange, straw blackened with age. Empty now, but the ghosts lingered. Marissa swept her light across the floor. "Looks like they cleared out quick," she murmured. Ethan knelt by a broken water dish, fingertips brushing the concrete. Scratches scored the floor, not from tools, but claws. "Desperate." Repeated. His jaw tightened. Shadow moved toward the far wall and stopped, tail stiff, nose pressed to a mound of hay. A low rumble rose from his chest. Ethan and Marissa rushed over, pulling the rotted bales aside. Beneath them, half hidden, was a trapdoor. Ethan gripped the handle and heaved. The wood groaned, hinges snapping loose. Cold air spilled up from below, damp and metallic. They descended slowly, flashlight slicing through the dark. The staircase led to a narrow corridor of concrete, the walls sweating with moisture. The air carried the smell of iron and rot. When the passage opened, it revealed a room carved into the earth, a bunker lined with welded kennels. Most were empty, but the stains on the floors told their story. Straw lay scattered and darkened, crusted with dried blood. Paw marks streaked the walls, nails scraping for purchase. Marissa's breath hitched. "Dear God." Ethan crouched by one cage. Tufts of black fur clung to the wire. He brushed his hand through the straw and froze. Buried beneath was a burlap sack. He pulled it free. Inside were bones, small skulls, jawbones with milk teeth, femurs splintered mid-length. Clara Jensen arrived minutes later, summoned by Marissa's call. When she stepped into the chamber, the color drained from her face. She knelt by the cage, tracing the rusted bars with her fingertips. Her voice trembled only once. "This wasn't a shelter," she said. "It was a breeding site. Dogs forced to produce until they broke. When they didn't yield profit, they were disposed of." Marissa's flashlight beam caught something glinting near the mound. Ethan reached for it, a tiny plastic capsule, scratched but intact. He turned it over and saw the microchip embedded inside. Marissa scanned it with her handheld reader. The numbers flashed across the screen. Her lips parted. Registered K-9 unit. Colorado State Patrol. Reported missing 3 years ago. Silence. Then Ethan whispered, voice low and steady, so they've been taking service dogs too. The weight of it pressed down hard. The air itself seemed to hum with old pain. Ethan stood slowly, fists clenched at his sides. No more, he said, the words simple but carved in stone. Shadow pressed against his leg, eyes glowing in the half-dark like embers, as if sealing the vow in silence. Above them, the world kept moving, crickets singing, wind shifting through the trees. But down there, the ground remembered. Morning came soft over Silver Creek, washed clean by a midnight rain. The storm that had followed the raid was gone now, leaving puddles in the ruts of Main Street and the smell of pine and wet earth hanging in the air. The headlines in the local paper told the story in bold black letters. Dog trafficking ring collapses, Colt Rainer in custody. For most, it was just ink and paper. But for Ethan Cole, for Clara Jensen, and for every trembling animal pulled from that warehouse, it was the first clear breath after years of poison. The town square, usually plain except for its cracked fountain and leaning clock tower, had been dressed for a celebration. Flags hung limp in the morning stillness. Children carried candles that flickered in the light, their parents steadying the wax with patient hands. Shopkeepers, mill workers, farmers, all had gathered to honor a kind of courage Silver Creek had never seen before. Shadow sat beside Ethan at the front, his coat brushed clean, though the scar on his ear still bent like a badge earned in battle. He was calm, eyes sweeping the crowd, posture upright, every inch the soldier he had always been. Ethan stood straight in a simple shirt and worn boots, uncomfortable under the attention but unwilling to step away. He hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted it, but the town had insisted. Sheriff Alden took the microphone, his dress blues pressed crisp, voice carrying across the square. Silver Creek has known its share of storms, he said. But every so often, light comes in the shape of a man, and a dog who refused to turn away. He turned toward Shadow, his voice softening. This shepherd stood between cruelty and mercy. And for that, our town will never forget. From a small velvet box, the sheriff lifted a round brass medallion engraved with the crest of Silver Creek. He knelt and clipped it gently to Shadow's collar. The metal caught the sun, glinting like a promise kept. The inscription read, Guardian of Silver Creek. Applause rolled through the square like thunder across the valley. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He'd heard applause before, after missions, after medals, but this was different. This wasn't about victory. It was about life saved, not taken. At the edge of the crowd, a small boy stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 10, hair tousled, jeans too short at the ankles. In his hands he held a strip of worn leather. Ethan recognized him instantly, the same boy Shadow had dragged from the flood last spring. The boy's voice barely carried. I made this, he said, holding the strip out. Ethan crouched as the boy fastened it gently over the shiny medallion. Scratched into the leather, in uneven letters, were 2 words, Guardian. Always. The crowd fell quiet. The moment stretched long enough for everyone to feel the meaning settle deep. Then the boy placed his palm on Shadow's head, whispering something only the dog could hear, before backing away with wet eyes. That evening, the celebration faded into softer sounds, porch laughter, the hum of cicadas, the clink of coffee cups. At the cabin on the outskirts of town, Ethan worked alone at the gate. He hammered a new wooden post into the soil and hung a hand-carved sign he'd burned himself with a soldering iron. Here you are, not for sale. The scent of pine smoke clung to the letters. The words stood as a vow, not just for Luna, Blaze, and Titan, but for every lost creature that might stumble into their lives. Inside the yard, the 3 pups had changed. Blaze chased a drifting leaf as if it were an enemy worth outmaneuvering. Titan lumbered after him, still clumsy but full of strength and mischief. Luna stayed near Shadow, cautious but finally wagging her tail in unguarded joy. Shadow lay in the warm grass, head high, eyes half closed in the kind of peace earned only after long service. The pups tumbled around him, safe under his watch. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, coffee in hand, a rare smile tugging at his mouth. He watched them for a while before speaking, not to anyone in particular, but to the quiet air, to the land, and to the ghosts that had finally gone still. Now we've got a home forever. The evening wind stirred the new sign at the gate, making it creak softly like a voice agreeing. Somewhere out over the river, the last light bent gold against the trees. For the first time in a long while, Silver Creek didn't feel like a town of silence. It felt like a place of promise. Sometimes miracles don't roar down from the heavens. Sometimes they arrive on 4 legs, scarred but unbroken. Sometimes they come as 3 broken pups learning that hands can heal. And sometimes, the greatest heroes never speak a word, they just stand guard until the world is right again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes that kindness can change the ending. And if you believe that guardians still walk among us, write amen in the comments below. May hope stay close. May love stay loud. And may God keep every soul, 2-legged or 4, safe in his hands.